Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this morning. Backing the challenger. Polls have opened in Zimbabwe this morning for the country's first general election since Robert Mugabe was ousted. He says he's backing the opposition. Held to account, Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras takes responsibility for the deadly wildfires that killed more than 90 people as the search for the missing continues. A friend among foes. The Italian Prime Minister will meet Donald Trump at the White House today, finding unlikely common ground after Trump called the EU a trade foe. Plus, over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
We have the latest as hundreds of hikers are still stranded up a mountain after a deadly earthquake in Indonesia.
And Welsh win in Paris as Team Sky rider Geraint Thomas brings home the Tour de France title. Thank you for starting your Monday morning with us. Our top story. Polls have opened this morning in Zimbabwe for the first general election since Robert Mugabe was ousted last year. It is a watershed moment for the country that has suffered severe economic challenges under decades of repressive rule. Well, it's the first time since independence that Robert Mugabe's name has not been on the ballot. He was in charge for almost 40 years. Now, with polls tight, in a surprise press conference yesterday, Mr. Mugabe surprised many by refusing to endorse his former party, claiming that he had been tormented by them and instead backing the opposition. Euronews' Evelyn Laverick has the story.
Still stirring the political waters as Zimbabwe holds its first presidential election for decades without him, Robert Mugabe has refused to back his own ZANU-PF party, who ousted him in November's de facto coup.
I was sacked from the party I founded. I cannot vote for those who have tormented me.
Today's election pits President Emerson Mnangagwa, Mugabe's successor and former enforcer, who now says he represents change, against Nelson Chamisa. He's a 40-year-old lawyer who's vying to become Zimbabwe's youngest head of state. The lack of support from his old boss now has Mnangagwa accusing Mugabe of striking a deal with his rival.
The choice is clear. You either vote for Mugabe under the guise of Chamisa, or you vote for a new Zimbabwe under my leadership and the ZANU-PF. Real change is coming.
Mnangagwa has survived several assassination attempts, including this blast at a rally in June, blamed on Mugabe supporters. Despite the violence, he's spoken about the need for a democratic space and is promising economic reforms. Meanwhile, Nelson Chamisa, who is leader of the Movement for Democratic Change and is standing out among over 20 other presidential candidates, is promoting himself as a unifying force and business-friendly.
If anything, my biggest task is to make sure that I unite this nation going forward. I must not be gazing into the past.
But above all, voters who are enjoying a newfound freedom not felt under the iron fist of Mugabe want to see an election untainted by irregularities.
We are hoping for a change and to heal the economy and many other things.
We have to keep the peace in Zimbabwe and keep the prayers high and let us all go and vote. Definitely something good is coming our way this time around.
But many are also wondering if Zimbabwe's establishment will ever accept an opposition victory. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
Well, with President Emerson Mnangagwa promising Zimbabwe free and fair elections, and the world is watching, what will the first elections free from Mugabe bring? Joining us live from the phone from Harare is Pindai Dube, a journalist from our sister channel Africa News. Pindai, can you just tell us, this is a big election. What is at stake?
Yes, thank you very much. A huge number of people have actually lined up to vote today. As I'm speaking to you, I'm at Kwadana Primary School, which is in the high-density suburb of Harare in the southern. So what happens is that we've seen a huge number of young people, excited young people who want to vote, who want to cast the vote. So that's what is happening. As I'm speaking to you, I'm at a polling station where the opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, will come to cast his vote.
Are the elections expected to be free and fair as promised?
Yes, it's expected to be free and fair, but what happened now is that the opposition is not happy with what has been happening with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. They accuse the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission of being biased. They're saying they are favoring Emerson Mnangagwa. So that's the position right now. And but it's expected to be free and fair. But some think that ZANU-PF is rigging these elections.
Is it expected that there will be an outright majority by any one party? If not, what happens?
Right. What happens now is that there will be what we call the runoff. There will be a runoff. So if there's a runoff, on the 30th of September there will be new elections. That's what happens.
All right, thank you for that. Journalist Pindai Dube from our sister channel Africa News on the phone there from Harare. Thank you. Now, the Greek government is facing criticism as the extent of the damage from the worst wildfires in recent memory becomes clear. Fire officials say the number of dead stands at 91, while 25 people are still missing 1 week after flames swept through the Athens region. Our correspondent Brian Carter is in Mati, one of the worst affected areas, and he sent us this report.
It's Sunday afternoon at the town hall of Rafina, 30 kilometers east of Athens. These volunteers from the Hellenic Red Cross are getting ready for another grueling mission, finding missing people in the surrounding areas devastated by the flames. Angelo, who leads the group, says he never saw anything like this during his time at the Red Cross.
As I have talked with other colleagues, with our volunteers, there are only few that have seen this kind of disaster for the last 20 years.
After the last briefing and checkups, these men and women head for the village of Mati, a name that now resonates with horror and destruction.
In the streets, we're going to look, to search. We're expecting something to find.
In Mati, the land is scorched and many buildings are reduced to ashes. Angelo and his crew advance with caution. They inspect every inch of burnt land. Sometimes they even venture into empty houses. This time the Red Cross didn't find any bodies, yet authorities say at least 25 people are still missing. At the harbor of Mati, another group of volunteers is active. Only they simply want to provide food and comfort for the community, like they have done in many other places in Greece with groups at risk.
This is a different situation because people here are not kind of need food because they don't have money, but here they just need company and a warm food to have hope for the future.
As Greece still grapples with grief, the question of responsibilities is increasingly being raised. Why couldn't the people be saved? Many take the example of this summer camp for children from Athens, where more than 600 kids were rescued on time. For the mayor of the country's capital, lessons need to be learned.
I see those kind of crises also as opportunities to change the way that we construct, the way that we build our communities, the way that we train people, the way that we are ready to confront such crises must change. And I think this time it will change.
Change is indeed what Greeks are asking for, so that tragedies like this one never happen again.
And Brian Carter joins me now from Mati. Brian, so we saw there that you were spending a lot of time with the search and rescue teams. What more can you tell us about the mission that they have, difficult mission they have?
Good morning, Tesa. Well, here in Mati, there's really a sense of duty. You can see a lot of people who are out cleaning, repairing, helping one another, talking to each other. After almost a week after this tragedy, there's really a sense that this community wants to come together to overcome this unprecedented tragedy. And it goes for locals, as you saw with the food distribution, and it also goes with NGOs and civil society organizations like the Red Cross, who are here trying to help and who will say they will they will stay here as long as necessary, because there's still a lot of work to be done. As you said, there are 91 people officially dead from this tragedy. 25 are still missing, so there's still a lot of search and rescue operation going on. But of course, there are still hundreds of people who are affected, whether it's directly or indirectly by the fires that happen here.
Yeah, and for those people who have been affected, how are they coping? How are they coping with what's happened?
Well, as you know, this is really a holiday destination, so the people that have been directly affected are probably home grieving with their families. But the ones who stayed here and the ones who I managed to talk to, well, there's of course still a lot of grief, but there's also a lot of anger and questions going on how this happened, and people are trying to blame or find somebody to hold responsible for. It's true, there's been a lot of talks about the urbanism and the way the buildings have been built here, with some of them directly on the sea and blocking access to the sea. And when you look at the roads here in Mati and other villages in this area, you can sort of understand how a tragedy like this could happen. I mean, there's barely enough space for two cars to pass, so you can imagine in a moment of panic when the whole village is trying to get out, you can understand how such a tragedy can happen. But as I said, after a week of grieving, now is really a time of questions. This week should be more political, with more questions being asked, more issues being raised to understand how this happened and especially how it can be avoided again in the future.
Indeed, that is the next step. Thank you for that, Brian Carter, the reporting there from Mati. Thanks. Now, over the weekend, video footage emerged of people sheltering in the sea in an attempt to escape the wildfires. And in the video, which was shot by a survivor, those who fled the flames can be seen huddling together, some with their children on their backs. But not everybody was able to get to the sea. Some found themselves trapped in cars or on the edge of cliffs, prompting questions about how the fires were able to cause so much devastation. Faye Dulcari from our Athens bureau. She's joining me now live again from Mati. Faye, so we saw those memorial services taking place. What's the atmosphere like where you are?
Yes, hundreds of people have attended a memorial service in Mati for the people that perished in the wildfire. There was a lot of grief, as you can understand, hundreds of people mourning, even people that haven't lost a loved one. During the weekends, there were funerals of the victims that have been already identified, but a wedding as well. Apart from the guests, that there were people from the area attending, just to show their support. From what they told us, many of them attended the wedding because they just wanted to feel hope that at some point their life is going to get back to normal. At the same time, there's a lot of rage among the people because it seems that the government is not apologizing. This is what they say. The Prime Minister, of course, assumed the political responsibilities, but no one until now has resigned. Only 2 local authority officials resigned over the weekend, saying, "We are going to do it since no one from the central government is doing it, and we actually feel very ashamed because of it."
Yeah, and as Brian was saying earlier, the search and rescue operations, they're still ongoing. Yes, and all these questions, it's getting a little bit more political. But what about the survivors? Any action being taken by the government to help them?
Yes. Fire victims, as from today, will be able to submit their applications to receive 5,000 euros in aid. According to the authorities, there is a safe estimate on the damages as the inspections have been completed. Since Friday, the government has pledged to pay 5,000 euros for households affected by the fire and 8,000 euros for businesses. Today, they will start tearing down damaged houses in the area of Mati. 3,500 houses have been inspected, and they have found that 1,000 houses are not fit for use, so they're considered dangerous and they have to be torn down.
All right, thank you for that. Faye Dulcari from our Athens bureau reporting there from Mati. Thanks. And still to come for you on the program, President Trump will welcome Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte to the White House later today. We'll talk more about why this could be a firm friendship. And over in the Cube,
hundreds of hikers remain trapped after a deadly earthquake in Indonesia. We'll have the story and the videos for you after a short break.
Your top story in Good Morning Europe, as voters in Zimbabwe head to the polls, their ex-president Robert Mugabe says he could not vote for his successor and former ally Emmerson Mnangagwa, backing the opposition candidate instead. Now, the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has arrived in Washington ahead of a series of meetings later today with the U.S. President Donald Trump. Conte, who leads a coalition government between two populist parties, the anti-establishment Five Star Movement and the Far-Right League, could find common ground with the president, despite Mr. Trump's labeling the EU a foe. And despite months of tension between the U.S. and the EU on matters of trade and military spending, the two leaders have been hugely complimentary of one another, with Trump calling Italy's new leader a really great guy. Well, let's go now to our correspondent, Claudio Lavanga in Rome, who is there to tell us more. Claudio, can you tell us about the relationship that we have seen so far between the two?
Good morning, Tessa. Well, the two have only met twice briefly before today, once at the G7 in Canada, literally a few days after Conte was sworn in as Prime Minister, and then in the more recent NATO meeting. And as you said, it seems like they're best buddies already. After that first meeting, Trump said he was a great guy, and Conte used very nice words for Donald Trump as well. And in a way, it's not surprising because the two are fairly similar. Well, if you look at it, Giuseppe Conte is the leader, the representative of a government that ran a recent electoral campaign based on a slogan, Italian first, based on heavy rhetoric against migrants. The new Italian government has been fairly critical against its historic allies in the European Union and very indulgent towards Vladimir Putin. Giuseppe Conte, I remind you, at the G7 meeting in G7 summit in Canada, was the only leader of the 7 to have signaled that he agreed with Trump when Trump suggested that Russia should be readmitted to the G7, therefore turning it back into the G8. So, yeah, a great start of that relationship, Tessa.
Yeah, so what's interesting is that do you think that today they're going to be talking about the things that bring them together, or there's the common ground, or do you think they're also touched on issues that divide Europe and America?
Well, the two leaders will probably look for reassurances on both sides, Tessa. In a way, Giuseppe Conte will look certainly for reassurance, for instance, that Trump is not going to introduce that threat of the 25% tax on cars, even though he already used reassuring words during that meeting with Juncker recently, because that will affect heavily the automotive industry in Italy, especially, of course, Fiat Chrysler. Conte will also look for reassurance that Trump and the United States will continue to support Italy in the Mediterranean region. Of course, the US have got several military bases scattered across Italy here. And in return, Trump will look for reassurances as well. In particular, he will look for reassurances that Italy is not going to withdraw the peacekeeping troops that they have in Afghanistan. The new defense minister signaled that he wanted to scale down on that, of course, as well as in Iraq. He will look for reassurances also that Italy will commit to big infrastructural projects like the TAP, the Trans-Adriatic pipeline that is in the works now, and it plans to bring gas from Asia all the way to Italy and therefore Europe in the future. And the reason why Trump will probably look for reassurance for that is that this government has already signaled that it wants to scrap or at least review big infrastructural projects that have been going on for a while now, including, for instance, the high-speed rail link between Turin and Lyon, which has been in the works for many years. It cost billions of dollars. It's a pan-European project, and at the same time, the government is saying, "Well, we're going to review that." So I don't know whether we'll continue to finance that. So Trump will want to have reassurance that Italy can stick to its promises and its planning, as well as, of course, every other foreign investor. Tessa.
Indeed, it will be to their benefit to point out that they do have an ally. Thank you for that, Claudio Lavanga reporting there from Rome. Thanks. Now, a magnitude 6.4 earthquake has hit a popular tourist island in Indonesia. Alex and the Cube team have been following the developments in that.
We have, Tessa, and the latest on this story is that hundreds of hikers remain trapped up at Mount Rinjani, a volcano in Lombok, a very popular tourist destination in Indonesia, after an earthquake over the weekend. Let's just bring you the latest from a spokesperson for the disaster mitigation agency there, who says that of the 820 people who were trapped up that mountain after the earthquake, around 246 have been safely evacuated, but that does mean over 500 people are still trapped up Mount Rinjani waiting for rescue. We've heard reports this morning that they will be rescued in the coming hours today. But perhaps the moment that really sums it up is videos like this. This is from a 28-year-old Thai tourist, Anuat, who posted this video after the first quake. It shows people on the mountain. You see hikers, tourists here, desperately trying to get down. He had just climbed to the summit when the first tremors struck. Then he and his group tried desperately to find other ways down. Now, with the tremors, the pathways were being blocked and disrupted. So perhaps the key thing in this video is it's showing people trying to find new ways down from Mount Ranjani. Now, Anuat was actually lucky enough to get off Mount Ranjani. He's not one of those who is still trapped, but he shared his experience with us via direct message. We've been speaking to him this morning, just first of all verifying he's safe, but also then hearing about the kind of panic that set in when you're climbing a volcano and then an earthquake takes place. So it did panic him. Another group of Malaysian tourists were up climbing in the region, and they found themselves stranded. As I say, the passages and pathways down became blocked. Well, they shared these photographs of locals helping them with, you can see here, tarpaulin structures and a bit of food while they awaited rescues. In a Facebook post, they asked for helicopters to rescue them from where they were. Well, this Malaysian group were rescued just around about midnight last night. So they did safely get away as well, which is a positive side to this. But really, I suppose you could say with tourists, if they're able to successfully leave the island, they can go back. But the people who will have to pick up the pieces and deal with this are those who live there. And this is one of the worst districts affected by the earthquake here. We've spoken to the journalist who shot this. This is one of the worst districts affected, and he was just describing the devastation you can see here. We know that hundreds are homeless, and around 1,000 homes have been destroyed. 1,000 homes have been damaged, and you can just see here for some of them that have been destroyed, just the extent to which these people have lost everything. So at this stage, while hundreds of people do remain trapped and rescue efforts are underway, for a lot of the locals, the focus now is going to be on picking up and rebuilding. But at least 14 people have died, and over 100 have been injured in this deadly earthquake. Tessa.
All right, it's quite a tragedy there. Thank you for that, Alex and the CUBE team. And still to come on the program, what happened to flight MH370? Well, over 4 years after the plane went missing, we still don't have answers. A new report is out today. And we will hear from the Palestinian teen Ahed Tamimi, released from prison yesterday for slapping a fully armed Israeli soldier in the occupied West Bank town of Nabi Saleh. We'll be right back after the break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now let's head over to the Middle East, where a Palestinian teen activist and her mother have been released from an Israeli prison. Ahed Tamimi became a household name after her arrest while she served an 8-month sentence, celebrating her 17th birthday behind bars. James O'Hagan has the story.
Last December, Ahed Tamimi, then aged 16, was arrested after footage of her slapping and kicking a fully armed Israeli soldier in the occupied West Bank went viral. Tamimi has since risen to prominence as a symbol of resistance for Palestinians and a provocateur for Israeli settlers. Her arrest has gained media attention across the globe and shone a spotlight on Israel's detention of minors. After laying a wreath at the tomb of Yasser Arafat, Ahed Tamimi was quickly back in a combative mood, voicing her anger at the presence of an Israeli settlement next to her West Bank home. First of all, she told Euronews partner NBC, I don't just want this settlement to be gone. I want the whole occupation to end. The issue needs to be solved at its root. We must aim to end the occupation, because when the occupation is over, the settlement will be gone, and so will the checkpoints and the entire wall. Our main problem is the occupation. In a packed first day of freedom, she also met with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. She went on to say that she believes Palestinians must start building now for a better future. I tell my generation that the most important thing for us now is education, she told us. Education is the only tool that will enable us to achieve our own goals and to help develop our country. We need to link the national struggle with the social one in order to live after the occupation is over in a democratic state and with equality between men and women. James O'Hagan, Euronews.
And still staying on that story, an Italian painter was arrested over the weekend for painting a giant mural of the Palestinian teenager. That got a lot of social reaction, right, Alex?
It did, Tessa. This is that mural here being painted by an Italian artist. You can see it here, giant on the Israeli separation wall here. Now, the artist here is well known in Italy. His pseudonym is Jorit, and he's an Italian artist. There's also another Italian with him. But basically, during the painting of this mural here of the figure who was controversial, perhaps still is for many in Israel, the Israeli forces moved in. This is a video here showing the Israelis. It's been geolocated to the location, taking away the artistic materials and a suitcase here from in front of the mural. This unidentified lady here appears to be shouting at the Israelis, "That's mine, you can't take it, you can't take it." But they also have scooped up and taken with them a lot of spray paints. Now, Jorit is a graffiti artist, so this image here has been painted using spray cans. Well, those have been put inside this vehicle. At the end of this video, we see the Israeli forces here driving away with this suitcase being loaded in here and also these spray cans. Well, Jorit later posted an image, first of all, identifying himself as the artist, saying, yes, it's me, on his Instagram and his Facebook pages. But then afterwards, on just a few hours after that video, this appeared, a post from Jorit on Facebook. It seems to be that same black suitcase around a very similar vehicle. And in this post, he asked for help, saying he'd been arrested by the Israeli army near Bethlehem. Now, this post got a lot of traction, shared thousands of times with hashtag #FreeJorit, people jumping on saying the Israelis should free him. Well, he was arrested alongside another Italian. There was also a Palestinian as well. At the moment, their identities are unclear. But then a post came yesterday, a few hours later, saying basically that he was free, that they had been free. We had been freed, Jorit posting here. And a lot of people seeing this as a really positive step. But the Israelis had accused these Italians of vandalizing this border fence. And while I've just lost my screen here, oh, it's come back to you, there we are. It's worth saying that the mayor of Naples, which is where Jorit is from, posted to say they were now looking to get him safely out of Israel. But while he had been released, he'd been given 72 hours to get out of Israel by the Israeli authorities. So had been told to leave the country, but has been released alongside the other Italian, as well as the Palestinian, who the Israeli forces said didn't have any discernible role in the activities. So this mural, it's unclear, though, what will happen to this. It's clear that the subject, of course, is an icon for many, a controversial figure in Israel. While the artist might be leaving Israel, the mural stands. And so until it's taken off, the comments and people's views of it will no doubt continue to be divided.
All right. Thanks for that, Alex. Now, in Serbia, a lawyer known for his part on the defense team of the war criminal Slobodan Milosevic has been shot dead. Dragoslav Onjanovic was killed outside his Belgrade home on Saturday evening. He was part of the legal team who helped to defend Milosevic during his trial in The Hague in the early 2000s, and since then has defended some of Serbia's most prominent mafia figures. Safety measures have been put in place in the UK ahead of the funeral of nerve agent victim Don Sturges. Funeral staff and public health officials are working together to ensure the safety of mourners. Ms. Sturges died after coming into contact with Novichok in June, the same substance which was previously used to poison a former Russian spy and his daughter. Now, while Cambodia's ruling party declares victory in the country's general election, the opposition say the result should be rejected. Prime Minister Hun Sen of the Cambodian People's Party won the election amidst cries from human rights groups who said that the result was a backward step for democracy. The result provoked criticism after the principal opposition party was excluded. Well, we have a lot more coming up for you on the program, including the devastating California wildfires, where firefighters are still battling to get those flames under control. Plus, we're going to have a look at that social media movement that was sparked by the anti-racism row started by footballer Mesut Ozil. And you look at this, Geraint Thomas, he won the Tour de France. He said he had goosebumps cycling to that finish line, as one would have. But first, let's look at today's no comment from Russia, where a naval parade in St. Petersburg showed off some 4,000 officers and 40 warships. Vladimir Putin said he was proud of the fleet and the work that they do. Your top stories in Good Morning Europe backing the challenger. Polls have opened in Zimbabwe this morning for the country's first general election since Robert Mugabe was ousted. He says he's backing the opposition. Held to account, Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras takes responsibility for the deadly wildfires that killed more than 90 people as the search for the missing continues. A friend among foes. The Italian Prime Minister meets Donald Trump at the White House, finding unlikely common ground after Trump called the EU H-raid foe. And a Welsh win in Paris as Team Sky rider Geraint Thomas brings home the Tour de France title. 6 people have died in California, including a grandmother and her 2 grandchildren, as wildfires ravaged the state. Thousands of firefighters are battling the blaze, and 17 helicopters are dropping water in an attempt to dampen the fires. NBC's Steve Patterson has the latest.
At the front of the relentless car fire, firefighters doing all they can to contain the blaze.
Trying to get the heavy fuels down away from the line so we'll have less chance of embers crossing the line.
For nearly a week now, thousands of crews from across California have been locked in a fierce battle to gain ground. The flames keep spreading.
This is what firefighters are facing right now. Incredibly hot temperatures, steep terrain, and this heavy wind.
CAL FIRE Division Chief Chris Anthony says the conditions are unbelievable.
Extreme is not even the right adjective to use anymore. It's just an understatement because fire is so explosive now in California.
Crews now forced to take a defensive posture, bulldozing lines and lighting backfires, praying for the smoke to clear so they can continue an aerial attack. And they're working around the clock, in some cases with rotations up to 36 hours.
The biggest concern is the safety of our firefighters and the safety of the public.
Meanwhile, fear of an increasing death toll. 6 dead, hundreds of homes reduced to piles of rubble stretching several blocks.
1 minute it's fine, the next minute everybody's screaming.
Saturday, a family's worst fears realized. 70-year-old Melody Bledsoe and her great-grandchildren James and Emily, missing since Thursday, were found dead. Wow. And with 7 people still missing, the battle against this out-of-control fire rages on. Steve Patterson, NBC News, Redding, California.
Families of the 239 people on board the missing Malaysian Airlines flight have said that there is no new information about the reason for the plane's disappearance. The new report has still not been able to say why MH370 vanished when traveling to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur in March 2014. Now, only 3 pieces of plane debris have been found since, after they washed up on the coastlines on the Indian Ocean. Where earlier I spoke to David Gleave, an air crash investigator in the UK, about the lack of answers.
The crux of the matter is trying to find where the aircraft is. I think we can find the aircraft, but that's a question of time and money. But it's also a question of we have some evidence, but it's not enough at the moment to satisfy all of the lawyers around the world in terms of working for all the different parties. So whilst there may be some evidence, it's circumstantial rather than conclusive.
So it's not a question of technology. You're really saying it's just a matter of time and money. So the technology is fine. We can actually find that aircraft if we have the time and money.
And at the moment, it's winter in the southern Indian Ocean. It's very difficult to get people actually on boats out in that area of the world for several months at a time. So they tend to suspend the search whilst it's difficult for about 4 months over the winter period. And that's right at this moment in time. They need a holiday and a break and refit the ships and things like that. So if somebody comes up with some money, they can send the ships back out again and they'll go and search in some more areas. But the first reports that came out some time ago concluded that somebody was actually flying the aeroplane at the time of the accident. The aeroplane was under some form of human control.
Right. And what about, the families have been waiting for answers. They're going to be wanting to hear from this report. Where does the whole investigation go from here?
I think the Malaysians are stopping on the basis that the aircraft has not been found. There may be a little more modelling to do with oceanic waves if they find some more parts. But after that, I think it's then a question of continuing to search the seabed, taking a psychological model if somebody was flying the aeroplane and saying, well, they're more likely to have flown it here than there in order to hide the aeroplane. There's a lot of things that can be done, but I say it's more a question of time and money for the search. The technology is there to recover the aircraft if they find it on the seabed. And then once we have the parts, we can start to come to some form of conclusion as to why the aircraft ended up there in the first place.
That was David Gleave, an air crash investigator, talking to me earlier there. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, we will look at the social media movement inspired by German footballer Mesut Ozil's decision to quit the national football team. We'll be back after a short break. Your top story on Good Morning Europe: as voters in Zimbabwe head to the polls, their ex-president Robert Mugabe says he could not vote for his successor and former ally Emerson Mnangagwa, backing the opposition instead. Now, just over a week ago, the German footballer Mesut Ozil, he quit international football and said he didn't want to play for the German national team anymore, citing racism. Now, this sparked a lot of other conversation around other sensitive topics. Alex, tell us about this.
It did, Tessa. There was a lot of conversation. All of this comes down to this image, which really got Mesut Ozil here into hot water. He is of Turkish-German descent. And here he is pictured with President Erdogan of Turkey. And this photograph led a lot of people in Germany to accuse Mesut Ozil of not being truly German, not really representing Germany on the world stage. And Mesut Ozil got a lot of flack as well, because obviously Germany had a poor performance in this World Cup. So after the World Cup, he announced that's it. He's out of it, particularly because of the abuse he was getting over this photograph in particular, but also the suggestion he wasn't really German. Well, it's got a lot of people talking in the country, which is having a reflection online about identity in 2018. And Jessica Saltz joins us, our Germany correspondent from Berlin. Morning, Jessica. Can you explain to us exactly why the hashtag that's been associated with this discussion is called #MeToo, spelled TWO?
Well, when Mesut Ozil resigned, he accused the German Football Federation and the German media of what he said treating him like a German when he was winning at football and like an immigrant when he was losing. He said he was very proud of his Turkish heritage, and he said, "I have two hearts, one German and one Turkish." And this is what inspired the hashtag #MeToo, as in the number 2 campaign, which was started last week by a fellow Turkish German, Ali Can. And Can saying that he experiences the same kind of everyday racism that Ozil was outlining, and he started this campaign in order to encourage all sorts of immigrants and Germans with immigrant backgrounds living in the country to express their concerns about integration online and also explain their stories of everyday racism. And this is exactly what we've seen happen in the past few days. The hashtag #MeToo campaign has really gone viral. A lot of people explaining their stories of everyday racism, and a lot of people just voicing their support for the cause.
So, Jessica, as people are sharing it and talking about it, has there been any pickup from the authorities? Has there been any official reaction to this?
Well, the German public really shocked and disappointed about Ozil's resignation, and a lot of people here really surprised about his allegations of racism. Many people saying that they had no idea just how prevalent these examples of everyday racism are in Germany. But Germany's own Foreign Minister Heiko Maas saying that all you need to do is read these hashtag #MeToo stories to realise that racism still is very much a problem. And he said that it's time to join the voices of these people who are calling out for racism to be stopped. And of course, a lot of people now are saying that this campaign really needs to manifest itself into something real offline. There need to be real ways to tackle racism in Germany. And of course, the idea of migration and immigration into Germany was and remains a very polarising subject here. This is also something that's been appropriated by the far right. The far right party, the AfD, its leader Alice Weidel, said that Mesut Ozil is an example of the failure of integration by the Muslim Turks into Germany. So this remains a very divisive issue, and of course this campaign still expanding within Germany and beyond its borders online.
Absolutely, Jessica. Jessica, thank you very much. Jessica, our feet on the ground there in Berlin, at the centre of perhaps the political side of this story. But a lot of people, as Jessica was saying, sharing their personal stories about their experiences. Like this Turkish-German user, like Mesut Ozil, of Turkish-German descent, saying that when he was trying to ring estate agents, he wouldn't be getting any answers, but his German girlfriend, she would. Then when they got married, she started encountering the same problems when she took his name. So a suggestion there are issues in Germany. This user from Egypt says he was warned off coming to study in Europe, particularly in Germany, because of racism fears. And then there's this user here who said that she's Vietnamese and was worried about bringing in food from her mum, which was traditional Vietnamese food, into schools to not look like the immigrant child. So a lot of discussion about Me Too, people with more than one identity in Europe today. What are your thoughts? What are your stories? You can let us know. We want to hear all voices. Use #TheCube in your comments.
Such a fascinating topic, identity there. Thank you, Alex and the Cube team. And still to come on the program, as Geraint Thomas become the first Welshman and third Briton to win the Tour de France. We'll look back at how he reached the top of the podium. We'll be right back after the break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, Welshman Geraint Thomas has won the Tour de France, becoming the third Briton to win the competition. The 105th Tour finished in the streets of Paris on Sunday, and Norway's Alexander Kristoff won the final stage of the race, while Geraint Thomas finished on top overall, draping the Welsh flag across his shoulders after he crossed the finish line. Andy Rubini is joining me now in the studio to talk about that momentous win. I mean, he's the first Welshman. I mean, was it unexpected?
I think a lot of people expected Team Sky to win it, maybe not so much Geraint Thomas. The signs were there. He did win the Criterium du Dauphiné before this race, but still it was a fantastic win for Geraint Thomas. He led from stage 12, never looked back, eventually clinching his maiden Tour de France title, as you said, following in the footsteps of other British riders such as Chris Froome and Sir Bradley Wiggins. He actually reminds me of Wiggins a little bit. They both went from being Olympic team pursuit champions to winning the Tour de France, and just a great story overall. I mean, he's always, I don't know if you know much about Geraint Thomas, he's always been in the shadows, he's always had this supporting role within the Team Sky, and this time he's the one to lift the trophy, and here's actually what he had to say after winning the Tour de France.
Goosebumps coming onto the Champs-Elysees, and you know, all the Welsh flags, all the support is just like I've won the Tour. Like how does that happen? It's just, oh, it's mental.
It looks like he's a bit in shock there, but
yes.
It hasn't been easy for him. I mean, the crowd wasn't always on his side, were they?
No, not always. The Team Sky did get booed a few times. I think that's maybe due to the fact that the UCI dropped a doping case against Chris Froome just before the event started. He wasn't supposed to take part in this year's Tour de France. He eventually did, and I think this angered some cycling fans who didn't particularly want to see him, and because Team Sky have been dominating so much that they just maybe didn't want Chris Froome to participate in this respect, and they also thought that the UCI were basically telling him to participate and giving him the benefit of the doubt because he was Chris Froome.
Yeah. What about him? So how did he perform? Because you were saying that Geraint Thomas, he was more a supporting role, and what about Chris Froome now?
Chris Froome completed the podium. I think the turning point was probably at the Rosière stage where Chris Froome lost valuable seconds, and it's almost like the former champion knew that he wouldn't be able to retain his title, and it was almost like he was passing the torch to his teammate Geraint Thomas, saying, well, you've helped us so much in the past, time for us to help you as a team and help you lift this trophy and keep your yellow jersey. So great story for Geraint Thomas. I mean, he has sacrificed himself so much, always playing, as I said before, a supporting role within the team, and it's good to see him shine finally.
And I guess great for their team as well, Team Sky. Thank you for that, Andy Rubini. And thank you for joining us on Good Morning Europe. Do stay with Euronews for all of your top stories. In the meantime, today's No Comment is from southwest China, where torrential rains caused mud and landslides at the weekend. Hundreds of residents of Yunnan and Sichuan province were evacuated from their homes.